All right, Jerry's away, so you got me for 30 minutes. So I had to come up with a topic at somewhat short notice, and so our topic today is Mount Sinai. All right, so we're all pretty well versed in Mount Sinai. We open up our Bibles to Exodus. We have the amazing story of the Exodus, and the children of Israel sort of are led out of Egypt and end up at Mount Sinai. And feel free to argue with me today, by the way, if I'm getting it wrong, but I believe that they were at Mount Sinai for almost a year. And so this was sort of their home base for a little while. And there was this big transformation that had to happen with the children of Israel, right? So if we think about it, you would imagine that the children of Israel at this point in their history had an idea of God, but it was what was handed down to them through Jacob, and as they grew and expanded in Egypt for 400 years, I would imagine perhaps that knowledge might be watered down, might dissolve a little, but they would certainly have this idea that one day they were going to come out of Egypt and go into the promised land, right? So we know the story. Moses comes along, and you can see the transformation in their faith as they go from sort of wanting to stone him when things start going bad. He says to Pharaoh, and then Pharaoh doubles down, says, here's more work. And then, of course, we have all those 10 amazing plagues on Egypt, and then they're led out and they go through the Red Sea, and they see these amazing great miracles, and they know that God's with them, and they're led eventually to Mount Sinai, where now they're given a law, and so God sort of adopts them, doesn't he, as his people. And somewhere it says, I just read it the other day, it was in the readings, wasn't it? Was it in Hosea about Israel is my son, right? So a lot of this happens up at Mount Sinai, and we're all pretty familiar with it. So if we believe that this happened, what would we expect to see, knowing the story of the Exodus and Mount Sinai in particular? So if we're going to be an archaeologist and we're going to go out and we're going to look for evidence, because people say that's a silly story, but knowing what we know from the scriptures, if we're going to go out looking for this, what would we expect to see? Joseph.
Given the context, you're going to see the same strata of rock on other mountains near it. But what would be the key signature moment to know about this is if it was like a sedimentary rock and it was hit with this amount of heat for the days that it was subjected to it, right. 40 days and 40 nights. If it was sedimentary rock, it would become metamorphic because of the heat. If it was metamorphic, it would more likely look like igneous rock, like basalt or granite by the time it was done. Or you would see viscous rock, which is like obsidian or black glass because of the intense heat on the mountain.
So what Joseph's saying is we're going to go out on our archaeological expedition. We're looking for a mountain that's burnt. Is that what you're saying? Everyone agree with that? You're looking for a mountain that's burnt, right? So this is the traditional Mount Sinai, and as you open up your Christadelphian books that you have in your library, where is this Mount Sinai, the traditional site? Huh? In the Sinai Peninsula. So where does the Bible say that Sinai is?
Water.
But where does the Bible say Sinai is? Does anyone know? I'll get back to you at that point. Yeah? Arabia. Right? It says Sinai, which is in Arabia. Okay? But like Joseph said, they crossed over the Red Sea before they went to Sinai, correct? So the traditional, and I have an insert in my Bible that has them crossing over just this little sort of stream up near the pyramids. Okay, so that raises some questions. Well, what is the Red Sea? Where is it talking about Arabia? So what about, where was Moses before he went back and did all of the, back and forth with Pharaoh? He was over in the land of Midian, right? Midian, because that's where Jethro was. So where is Midian then? It's over in Arabia, right? On the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And you'll see a map here shortly. But so this is where you're welcome to throw tomatoes at me. All I want to do here is just show you that this place exists, and you can take it or leave it. So this is a mountain in Arabia, Saudi Arabia, on the northwest side, called Jabal al-Lawz, and it's grown in popularity over the last decades. If we were to go back to I don't know if it was the 80s perhaps, there was a sort of eccentric guy called Ron Wyatt that was thought of himself as an Indiana Jones type character, and he went over and documented this place that I'm about to show you, and you can choose whether or not you're on board or not. But I'm sort of on board with this guy with this particular site that we're going to look at. The only trouble is that he makes it difficult to get 100% behind him, because he also claims that he's discovered all the great biblical places. Like, he's also responsible for Noah's Ark, is in the news a little bit lately up in Ararat. He thinks he found the Ark of the Covenant sort of under Golgotha, and he saw it, but then he got chased off by the authorities and didn't get time to take a picture and these sort of things, right? But what I'm about to show you is all documented. So this is Jabal al-Lawz, and it looks like that's just cloud shadow, but it is actually black on top, and it's over in Arabia. So here we have the potential journeying of the children of Israel. So they leave Ramesses and then would cross over the Red Sea, being the Gulf of Aqaba there. If you get an atlas out, the Red Sea is the section that's below the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. And we all know the story. We think that the children of Israel may have been around 1.5 million, 2 million people. And we know that from the scriptures that they get to the beach, and they're trapped, right? And then, of course, the Egyptians come charging after them, and they think, this is it, we're dead. We've got nowhere to go. We've got a mountain on either side of us, and we've got the sea here, and then the Egyptians are behind us. And they say to Moses something to the effect, do you bring us out here to die? And Moses says, stand back and watch the glory of the Lord. And God, not only does he open up the sea to let them pass, but he also puts a barrier between them and the Egyptians with the fire, right? So we would expect to have somewhere on the beach that you could put 1 million or 2 million people. And that's just what we get here in this Nuweiba Beach area. And you can see that as you come down towards the beach, that you're going through this narrow sort of valley, and you can imagine that if you're on that beach and the Egyptians were in the valley, that you would be trapped. You would have nowhere to go. Now, they claim that there is somewhat of a bridge that goes across under the water there. I've tried to look up marine underwater, and it's not quite as pronounced as they claim it to be, but it is a little shallower as you go through there. Now, the Gulf of Aqaba is really, really deep. So it goes down to something like 5,000 feet on either side of this little land bridge here. So when they went through, if this is where they went through the water, it's not like the water was up to the ceiling here and they just walked across. Like, they went way down in there, if this is the place. All right, so something to think about. Now, what would you expect to see on the seabed if this is the place? Chariot wheels, right? So they claim that these exist. They haven't been able to bring them up because it's coral down there and you can't disturb the coral and there's certain rules and whatnot. But they have done now some scanning and there's some stuff down there that's worth exploring that could be. But wherever they did cross, even if this is not the place, somewhere in the world where they crossed is a bunch of gold chariot wheels. There's evidence of it, right? There's dead Egyptian armor down there somewhere. So they see these coral shapes and they think, well, maybe, that's a chariot wheel. So then they come out of the water and they have to go up to Sinai. So that's a picture, an aerial picture of this Jabal al-Lawz area. And you can see how blackened it is. And it just so happens that there's also a lot of other artifacts around this area. By the way, hands up, who's ever heard of all of this before? A fair few of you, so more than half. So here are some other things that we would expect to see, right? You'd expect to see maybe some sort of an altar where they had the golden calf. You've got the cave of Elijah that we'll look at in a minute, Sinai. There was 12 pillars set up, if we would go back and look at all of that. And then remember the rock that was split in two, or was split and the water came out. So you might sort of look for some of these things as well. This is at the site. You have these corrals that were perhaps used for animals, and then there's a little stream near it, so you can imagine sacrifices being done there. These pillars over here have been shaped in sort of a round shape, and they claim that there's enough there for 12 pillars. I don't have a picture of it, but there's also pillars on either side of that Red Sea crossing area, and it's believed that Solomon went back later and set them up sort of as a memorial. And keep in mind that this is in Saudi Arabia, right, which is a Muslim country. And so at this altar site where they think the golden calf would have been, there's these inscriptions of cattle. And there's more than one. And so that's interesting. There's also these type of inscriptions on some of the rock. So they're obviously a menorah. There's only one cave in this whole area, and that's it there. So or they think that this could be the cave of Elijah. So if you've ever sort of pictured that in your mind, if that's it, that's what it looks like. You go up a little closer, and there it is. So if that truly is the cave of Elijah, you can imagine him in there with the wind and the... Go ahead, Joe.
I was just curious, what other names are given to Mount Sinai besides this? Like, Mount Hermon has several different names. Mount Moriah has several different names. Mount Hermon has several different names. It's very confusing, but I'd just love to know, are there other names for Mount Sinai?
Well, my understanding of the Sinai area is you have one that's called Sinai and one that's called Horeb that's next to it, that's slightly lower elevation.
Okay. So
you do hear that, right? As you read through the scripture, you'll have such and such went to Horeb. And we're going to have a look later at, so Elijah went to Horeb, right? So another thing that you would want, and by the way, if I just back up a little bit, the traditional site of Sinai, the traditional Mount Sinai at the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula, I believe the history of that was that some Catholic group went through there 800 years ago or something like that, and somebody said, this is it. And so it's always just been Sinai since then, and if you go there today, there's a big sort of Catholic monastery thing set up there. Go ahead, Leah.
And her name was
Mrs. Constantine.
Catherine or Helena? Mrs. Constantine, yeah, exactly. I can't remember if it was Catherine or Helena, one of those two names, but she was the one who built that whole Sinai monastery up.
Right. So that would be, what, 800 AD? Oh, 300. Yeah, 300.
Constantine said to her, go find the Mountain of Sinai, and she just went down there and said, this is it. And then,
right.
Yeah.
She's got a bit more authority than anyone else. Okay, so you would want to have enough area that you could have 1 million or 2 million people camp for a year, right? And so this is the plain that's at the bottom of this Jabal al-Lawz, and you can see it's quite a big area. So that fits as well. I'm quickly running out of slides here, so we'll have a little discussion at the end, but
So the other names, I was just looking it up because I was like, I don't know why I didn't Google it, is Horeb. And a lot of people, who are scholars agree that it's the same mountain. And then Jabal Musa, or Mount Musa, which is Moses' mountain in Arabic, the mountain of God, and Mount Paran is a poetic name for Sinai.
Okay, yeah, I thought that was, and I didn't have a note in my Bible about
So
that.
there's
Paran. Yeah, and so this place here in Saudi Arabia is sometimes known as Jabal Musa, which means mountain of Moses. So even they realized what it was. Okay, so Joseph had said at the beginning that you would expect to see a burnt mountain. Go ahead.
Just a quick question on why do we think God wants to obfuscate or hide certain things that would inevitably lead people to him? So, for instance, the ark you had mentioned earlier. If you saw the ark and it was still there, you would say, oh, obviously the story of the flood has some validity. If we saw real evidence of the people at Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai, as opposed to whichever one is real, right? There's speculation because we weren't there, but wouldn't it draw people to God, and wouldn't he want to have these things available and visible so that people would see and then believe?
Yes. I also think it's kind of extraordinary that the site, if this is the site, has been preserved for this whole time. And the Saudis have put a big fence up around this. And I believe you can actually now go there as a tourist. And they're starting to open it up. But for the longest time, this is not something they wanted splashed all over the newspapers.
It was at like a conference or something years and years ago, and the brother gave a class kind of about a lot of this stuff, about like the archaeological evidence and how there's little tidbits here, little tidbits there, but there's no, giant flag waving that says like this is the evidence. And his idea behind it was that, there's still an element of faith that we need, and I think that's how God lays a lot of it out there. There's evidence, there's snippets throughout time and history, but it's not a big red flag. Like we're never going to see like 100% proof. Like this is an act of faith that we're going through and navigating.
So one thing that comes to mind is the bronze serpent on the pole. You left that thing in their hands, and the next thing you know, it's a god to them, and they started worshiping it.
Yeah.
So having things like the Ark of the Covenant just laying around might divert their attention to the object rather than what's behind it, perhaps.
to go on what Daniel was saying, the verse that immediately jumped in my mind as he started saying that was what Jesus said to Thomas, "Blessed are those who have not seen and believe."
Yeah.
So I think it can be for the same reason. We believe it because God said it, not because there's an ark planted on the mountain.
Well, I just messed it up for you all because I've shown you the pictures.
I was thinking about what Walter said, and while I agree with that to some extent, today we have all of the fake sites that Helena discovered, and yeah, people go there and they worship there, and maybe they think that's a holy place that will bring them healing or something, whatever. If we had the real place, and we knew it was the real place, I don't know how different it would be from today with the fake places.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be real in some cases.
Yeah.
The manger in Bethlehem, it's going to be within a couple hundred yards. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would hope that this stuff is just sort of interesting. None of us should be hanging our faith on this sort of stuff. It's just interesting.
Can you go back to the slide that you had up before this, where the
I'll try.
kind of deserty looking area? I'm reading or listening to on my Bible app at night, and it's the Bible in a year, and so I'm at the part where the Jews have just come out of, the land, and they're wandering around in the desert. And I just look at this picture, and I just said to Brogan, I don't think I could have done this. I mean, how arid it is. No wonder they
that's a
freak
great
out about
point.
water. No wonder they're freaking out about food.
Oh, yeah.
Because you look around and you see nothing that's going to help you.
Yeah.
That's why you need God. That's what we're here.
Oh,
That's
I know.
us.
I think it would have been horrible. Right? You think, like, we complain if there's no soda at a Sunday school picnic, and like, imagine being out there for 40 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I like Walter's thing that they would come to worship whatever was proof, because they did that with the bronze serpent. It became Nehushtan. 700 years later, it was King Hezekiah who had to destroy it. And I was like, what a great piece for a museum.
Yeah.
Would have been a great exhibit. But the same thing's true. And for me, I think God doesn't want his proofs to be scoffed at and to be made fun of and to be mocked. So the Noah's Ark will probably never be discovered. The Ark of the Covenant will probably never be discovered. Mount Sinai will never have any positive proof. But we're in an era of nothing but conspiracy theory. Do we really land on the moon? Is the world flat? Blah, 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 blah. So I'm like, what good would it do if you knew for certain that this was the truth? If you could bring up the Egyptian wagon wheels at the bottom of the ocean, it still wouldn't be good enough. And it brings to mind the parable that Christ said about Abraham and Lazarus. He's like, even if somebody is raised from the dead, they still will not believe.
To a point, though, when Christ returns and he's king of the world and he says, that's Sinai, that will be Sinai, right?
Jesus says clearly, scoffers will scoff. That's what they do.
Slightly different subject. That picture you just had up there reminded me of, we were looking at Psalm 23.
Yeah.
Said, he leads me in green pastures.
Right.
We get this picture of a beautiful English or American countryside with lush green fields, and that's not what they have in Israel. That picture prior to that one.
But it is, though.
That's a green pasture. That's a green pasture that David knew.
It was a land flowing with milk and honey, though, and the Israel that we see today is because of the Deuteronomy 28 curses. Right? So that's what we have to remember, that when David said he was sitting down in green pastures, they were green pastures. And there was water there. But because of Israel's disobedience, we have the Israel that we see today. All right, now I'm running out of slides. I've got too many slides, so go ahead, Walter.
Careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah.
So it's good to remember that in studying places like North Africa and all across that zone, they easily see that 5,000 and 6,000 years ago, There was more water there than you knew what to do with. It was green, it was luscious. And they've even recently discovered that all that water has gone underground and is just below the surface there, that you can find it.
Yeah.
So it's there ready to spring forth and renew things. Back to the last point we're making, the thing about having too many relics, we'll call them relics, showing up, is it kind of matches up with in the New Testament when he warns, when I return, shall I find the faith on the earth? Too many things to look at and say, oh yeah, okay, that's good, distracts me from believing that God will put the things he says in place. Especially if I find the Ark of the Covenant, hey, it don't look like the way I remember it said it in the Bible. I've been deceived or something. So we need to focus on what's behind the things, the faith that it requires.
Yeah, I just think that this stuff has to be, the evidence is there. Like somewhere under the water is the Egyptian armor. It's there. If you believe that they actually got drowned in the waters, it's there. Because nobody had scuba gear until 100 years ago. So when we see the evidence, we should be like, oh, okay, well, that's exactly what I would expect to see. Now, the unbeliever looks at it and says, yeah, that's planted there by someone. Anyway, let's move on because we've only got a few more minutes. So Joe had said at the beginning that you would expect to see the mountain burnt. So here's the rock, one of the rocks on the top, and you can see the outside is sort of burnt and then it goes back to its normal color the deeper you go into the rock. So the next one, you can see it's been broken away and underneath is the real true color of the rock, but the outside has definitely been sort of scorched, had the color changed. So in the minutes that remain, I want to just sort of touch on this. When we think about Sinai, it's been a bit of a central place where people have gone. We've already discussed and well aware of that Moses was there, but Elijah also went there. And if we were to go to 1 Kings 19:8, after the competition with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, Jezebel put up the most wanted sticker on or paper on all the telegraph poles, and he fled and went to Horeb, it says in that verse. So he went up to Horeb, and then he goes up there and sort of sulking and says to God, you need to just wipe everyone out because this is pointless. Nobody's listening to me. And God says, the still small voice, right? But that was there. That was at Horeb/Sinai, and that's where he went. Jesus, it doesn't say Jesus went there, but I personally, I can't prove it, think this is where Jesus went. When he came out of the waters of baptism, the Spirit led him off into the wilderness in Luke 4, 40 days and 40 nights. So Elijah went 40 days journey from Carmel to Horeb, so we know that that's a 40-day journey, and Christ comes up out of the Jordan and he's gone for 40 days and 40 nights. And I think this would be fitting for him to go there because that's the place where Moses talked with God. We know it was God's angel, but talked with God there. And then we have the Apostle Paul, surprisingly enough, tells us in Galatians 1, that he went into Arabia. And I can imagine him going down there and getting some one-on-one time with God or the Lord Jesus before he went off on all his missionary stuff. And Paul gives us sort of hints later on that he says, once I discovered Christ, I don't care about any of the rest of it. It's dung to me. Christ is all I care about. And so I think he certainly had things perhaps expounded to him down there as well. All right, so if that's true, I can't prove it. Go ahead.
Speaking of Paul and the book of Galatians that he wrote, he's the one who wrote this, and I really would love to get your thoughts on this. He says, these things are illustrations for the women represent two covenants. One is from Mount Sinai and bears children into slavery. This is Hagar. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is slavery with her children. but the Jerusalem above is free, and she is our mother, for it is written, and it goes on. So it basically ties Mount Zion into Sarah and Mount Sinai into
Hagar.
Sinai. So just curious your thoughts on that, because Paul's mentioned in Galatians 1. This is Galatians 4:24.
Right. So that's definitely true. And I had a Christian tell me last night that, because I brought up the Old Testament, he says, forget about the Old Testament. It's all law. Everything's grace now. Anyway, so we don't throw the Old Testament out, but we'll come back to that. I know I'm out of time, but we'll come back to it, trust me. So in Eureka, Brother Thomas suggests that Sinai is the place that we're going to go to for judgment. And it's kind of fitting to me, I think, right? Walter's already disagreeing. That's okay. That's okay. But one of the reasons, some of the evidence I think for this is, we've got some quotes up there. So I'll just read them out because otherwise we won't have time. So we'll just read a couple. If we go to, what's the first one? Psalm 27. Psalm 27. And verse 5. For the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. So remember Christ said, it'll be like the days of Lot. You're taken away and then this time of trouble hits, right? So he's going to hide us in his pavilion. In the secret of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me upon a rock. And then you have a very similar verse just over at the next one where it says, thou shalt hide them in the secret of thy presence from the pride of man. Thou shalt keep them secretly in the pavilion from the strife of tongues. And we could argue, how do we hide from satellites and all those things? And that's sort of a tangent we could go on if we had more time. But there's certainly plenty of space there. It ties in. We've got other verses like Ezekiel 20 where God suggests that the second Exodus, where the Jews are brought back, is going to be very similar to the first one. We have quotes like in Habakkuk 3 and other places where this march of the rainbowed angels sort of begins down south in Paran and then moves north out of there, Christ and the saints as they go off to do their work before they get to Armageddon. Let's see. Yeah, we'll finish here. So to come back around to what you were saying, Joseph, in Hebrews chapter 12 there, we have this contrast again between Sinai and Zion. And so if it is true that judgments at Sinai, we ultimately end up in Zion. So we move from the south to the north. And so anyway, that's just some interesting, fun stuff about Sinai. It's potluck today, so if you've got questions or disagreements with me, come and tell me. Just sort of fun to think about, and ultimately we'll find out the answer of where judgment is. But God seems to use the same things over and over again, I think. Everything becomes a pattern for what's going to be laid out in the future. So we'll finish there and move on to prayers for others.